On Silent Film Fridays, come learn about films before they could talk and stay for the observational humor. My name is Dr. Tiffany Knoll, and I'm an associate teaching professor with the Department of Popular Culture in the School of Cultural and Critical Studies at Bowling Green State University. I'm a cultural historian and early film expert, teaching in the world's first department dedicated to the study of popular culture. Silent Film Fridays is a streaming co-production with my daughter, Alex, hello, of ATK 42 Games. We feature silent films without the modern soundtracks and fill the silence with a combination of film studies, history, cultural studies, and the lessons of the sages Statler and Waldorf, and Joel Robinson and Mike Nelson.
It's Silent Film Fridays, where the films are silent, but the hosts are not. Broadcasting at twitch.tv/ATK42Games on Friday nights at 7 p.m. Eastern. Join us, won't you?
Aloha Baker has taken her place in the front rank of the limited company of women explorers. The world's most traveled woman, a title frequently given to Aloha Baker, tells but half of the story. Her expeditions have taken her over byways seldom covered even by the most intrepid male rovers, a vintage advertisement explains to us. Aloha Baker will tell you a story that will stir your imagination, a tale of daring and intrepidity that might challenge all the resources and courage of the most adventurous explorer. Hello everyone and welcome back to the globe-trotting, car-driving, world-exploring library of the Golden Silent Films podcast. This podcast has been slowly making its way around the world, much like Aloha Wanderwell Baker, the subject of this very episode. Just way less cool, less barrier-breaking, and almost certainly less dangerous. Before driving our specially made Ford podcast through this book review, let's talk about the usual Golden Silent Films podcast social media convoys. As usual, head on over to Golden Silence Cast on Instagram for up-to-date info on this little show. And for all of you folks on Twitter and or X, just follow at Golden Silence 1 or just search for Golden Silence Cast and we should pop up. All of those screen names and sites will be in the episode description in case you're interested in checking us out. We would love to have you along for the ride. At both social spaces, you'll get behind-the-scenes pics and info, upcoming episode reveals, and other fun film-related materials. And great travel photos of our podcasts, Soda and Gizmo, as they journey throughout the house. Also, if you're listening to this program on Spotify or Apple Podcast, as you motor from continent to continent, leave reviews, ratings, or both. Our show has been around for over 4 years, and we have only gotten 14 reviews on iTunes. We would love to see that number keep growing, and you awesome silent film fans out there can make it happen. All of those ratings and reviews help so very much. Live your best review leaving life and help our show grow a little and reach fellow silent film fans. Dropping those reviews gives us more exposure in the world of podcasts and lets us know how we can improve. As always, we are grateful for the feedback and always want to bring you the best show humanly possible. And do subscribe to the Golden Silent Films podcast. While our output can be unpredictable, if you are subscribed, you will never miss an episode, and the moment new content drops, it will go straight to your listening device of choice. We are well into our 4th season and do not want you to miss a single second. While we're talking about the podcast and subscribing and listening and all that jargon, we just want to pause for a moment to thank all of you out there for listening to this show. This is a labor of love for everyone here at the Golden Silent Films podcast, and we work hard to put on a show that we are proud of, and hopefully a show you enjoy. We bring this up because we just passed the 12,000 listen mark, and had to thank you from the bottom of our silent film loving hearts. You folks out there are amazing, and we appreciate every single one of you listening. Now that we've covered the audio side of things, let's remind all of you out there of our newish presence on YouTube. We have started putting past episodes out for your streaming pleasures. Whether these past gems are new to you, or you want to relive past movie discussions, just search for the Golden Silent Films podcast and we will pop right up. We only have 16 subscribers at this moment and would love to see that number jump as well. Since we are new to YouTube, please do us a solid and click on over and like and subscribe. We hear it's what all the cool YouTubers are asking for, and if I remember correctly, also hit that notification bell. It's all about the engagement and algorithms with this show. We are old and often technically inept, so give us a little positive reinforcement and give our fledgling channel a once-over. Thank you all so very much for supporting us on all of our numerous platforms. So, we here at the Podcast Home Office have always had a fascination with exploration and discovery and those who risked so much for those discoveries. From old tomes and biographical writings to the modern day YouTube travel vlog, we are always keen on seeing everything the world has to offer. Even watching the travel vlogs made by friend of the show Tom Was Here on YouTube, those have ignited our need to get up and go explore. But back in the day, though, a lot of those intrepid explorers, for better or worse, ventured headstrong into the unknown, but opened up a world for those who were to follow. Some of those explorers charted new lands and countries, others sought to conquer Mother Nature and push the limits of human endurance, while others, like those involved with the Wanderwell expedition, sought to document the world for movie audiences the world over. Some of those adventurous folks left written works that would allow us boring couch potatoes to, in our imagination and mind's eye, join in on the venture. Sure, we've all dreamed about being in the shoes of an Indiana Jones or a Lara Croft, but actual people were going to places unseen by human eyes. In the modern age, with the exception of sea and space, I guess, mankind has a pretty good grasp of what to expect in every corner of the world. Heck, anyone with a phone or tablet can get a live look at almost anywhere in the world with the click of a button. It wasn't always like that, though. It's a big world out there, and so many interesting people out there have ventured into that unknown and returned to tell their stories. From Ernest Shackleton's chilling tales of Antarctic exploration, to Percy Fawcett's disappearance in the jungles of South America, to Norwegian Fridtjof Nansen's first crossing of Greenland, here at the podcast, we have always loved reading about these daring exploits. But what do those two, plus many other explorers, have in common, though? If you answered gender, then you would be correct. If you also answered they were adults, you would also be correct. The life and adventures of Aloha Wanderwell proved to be so extraordinary that they deserve a spot on that adventurer bookshelf we love so much here at the Podcast Home Office. Now, Aloha Wanderwell Baker wasn't simply confined to the written word. In fact, in addition to being a pioneer in the world of travel and exploration, she was also a trailblazer in the film world. And both of these pursuits would come together to make the girl bigger than life. A true legend. And it all started when she was just 16 years old. In an article for the Great Women Film Pioneers Project website, Jessica Deprest writes, heralded in the promotion of her lectures as the world's most widely traveled girl, Aloha participated in the production of 11 travelogues from 1921 until approximately 1952. She presented these films with live lectures across the United States and internationally. The travelogues ranged in both length and style, reflective of the changing practice of travel lecture filmmaking in the first half of the 20th century, and Aloha's own evolution from crew member to producer-director. Nearly 100 years before the advent of YouTube, Aloha was one of the earliest travel vloggers. But oddly enough, it wasn't her cinematic exploits that got her on our radar. It was her autobiography, Call to Adventure, that hooked us. As I mentioned earlier, we have a bit of a collection of biographies and autobiographies that we like to give a read from time to time. Now, just skimming the back cover of this book was enough to blow my mind. And that was before I realized a lot of her exploits were all while she was a teenager. If you're interested in giving this great book a read, look no further than Amazon. You can find a copy of Call to Adventure for a very affordable price. While the original publication happened in 1939, the version we are looking at is a newer edition. And to sweeten the pot, this newer edition does include 2 essays and a plethora of photos, all from the author's estate, and we cannot recommend it enough. Now, since we are talking about the book, let's dig a little deeper into its publication history and backstory. Aloha wrote the book in 1938, and it was published on November 22, 1939, when Aloha was 33 years old. This autobiography collected her stories and experiences into a single volume that would garner her the nickname of the Amelia Earhart of the automobile. In her own words, Aloha Wanderwell Baker recounts the true story of a fantastic 7-year journey around the world that took place in the 1920s in the driver's seat of a Model T Ford while traveling with the Wanderwell expedition. But were they her own words? Sort of. Aloha's book, Call to Adventure, was published by Robert M. McBride, publishers of New York, who decided to aim the title at young adult women, writes Christian Fink Jensen and Randolph Eustace Walden in their book Aloha Wanderwell, The Border-Smashing Record-Setting Life of the World's Youngest Explorer. They continue, much of Aloha's text had been rewritten by a ghostwriter who, in the style of the day, heightened the drama while subduing the trials and tribulations. Aloha was appalled and would never again trust someone else to tell her story. Upon its initial release, the public response would be, as Fink Jensen and Eustace Walden put it, tepid. Not long after, the book would be out of print. In a funny story, Aloha agreed to buy out the publisher of the rest of the copies of her book. Unfortunately, a snafu in the delivery process doomed those copies to a voyage to a local landfill. You see, Aloha was not home when the initial delivery was made, and they were subsequently left at her property's edge. Not long after, city garbage trucks, just doing their job, saw the boxes, and away they went. Luckily, unlike many silent films, the book still exists for us to enjoy to this day. In Call to Adventure, we are treated to a vast array of colors and sounds. They manage to capture worlds of human existence never before recorded. Some of those words, tragically for us, no longer exist, writes Tracy Landecker. The book has it all, Richard Diamond, Aloha's grandson and also founder of AlohaWanderwell.com, says. There's adventure, intrigue, romance, and murder. So, before we get to the adventuring at hand, let's take a quick moment to set the scene and introduce the main character and author of this story. Idris Gausia Welsh was born on October 13, 1906 in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada, though that origin story does still leave us with a bit of a mystery. Dave Obey, in an article for www.timescolonist.com, writes, the story of her early years is not clear. Manitoba birth records say she was born in Winnipeg on October 13, 1906, to Robert Welsh. Or maybe it was Welch, and his wife, maybe, Margaret Headley, whose maiden name, if it can be called that, might also have been Hadley. Were Robert and Margaret married? No record of a marriage has been found, and we don't know that happened to Robert, we don't know what happened to Robert, whether he died or divorced or just moved on. There is no definitive record to say what happened to him. We can say, however, that on October 16, 1909, in Salmon Arm, 31-year-old Margaret Headley married 22-year-old Herbert Cecil Victor Hall. The nuptials to Herbert would result in a 3-year-old Idris Welsh becoming known as Idris Hall. Her stepfather was a developer and rancher on Vancouver Island, and the family lived in Parksville and Duncan. In 1914, at the start of the First World War, Herbert joined the Canadian Expeditionary Force and after arriving in England, was transferred to the British Army and made a lieutenant in the Durham Light Infantry. The family, Idris, her sister Margaret, Verner Mickey Hall, and their mother, followed him to Europe where they traveled around England, Belgium, and France. In June of 1917, Herbert Hall was killed in combat in Ypres, Belgium. By 12, Idris had traveled unaccompanied by rail and ocean liner from her boarding school in Canada to England to be with her mother after Hall was killed in World War I. Tracy Landecker explains what the death of her father pushed young Idris to look deep inside and determine what her life would become. Landecker writes, Idris was brought into the cruelties of reality in 1917 when her father was killed in action in Ypres. This trauma helped to mold the woman and the mover and shaker she was to become. Already a tomboy, the death of her father gave rise to her urgent need to become the man of the family. Someone had to be the familial protector, and money and career became a prime concern. Like others of her generation, almost unwittingly, Aloha was thinking in novel and inventive ways about how to live her life. And unlike most other girls, she had the drive, stamina, and stature to live that life. During this time, Idris attended boarding schools in Europe, Benedictine Soeurs de Saint-Sacrement in Courtrai, Belgium, and Château Neuf in Nice, France. In an essay on the official Aloha Wanderwell website, we get a little insight into the mind of young Idris and her growing sense of adventure. The article reads, Devastated by the death of her father, young Idris displayed a restless spirit and was constantly at odds with her superiors at the convent school, who tried in vain to transform the 6-foot-tall, self-described tomboy into a proper young lady. Instead, inspired by the fantastic tales she read in her father's beloved collection of boyhood books, Idris dreamed of travel, adventure, and intrigue in far-flung corners of the globe. And it is with her schooling in Nice that we catch up with Idris at the dawn of her journey. Young Idris, at this point, is about to literally have an entire world open up for her. And like any good adventurer, it started with a classified ad in a newspaper placed by a guy named Captain Wanderwell. Sounds on the up and up, right? Well, Walter Wanderwell is the epitome of an adventurous name. Very, gung-ho all-American, right? Before ever crossing paths with young Idris, he was born Valerian Johannes Paczynski in Poland. Whether that is an adventurous name in Polish, I cannot say, but he soon made a name for himself racing Ford Model Ts all over the world. Tracy Landecker gives us some insights into Cap when she writes, "Like Aloha, Walter Wanderwell was a paradoxical and enigmatic figure. His yearning was vast, perhaps excessive, and his stamina endless to achieve his goals. But like Aloha, he eschewed the customary partying and carousing of the period. He was a mystic and deeply spiritual. In terms of lifestyle, he was Spartan and ascetic, but not in his predilection for women. He was quite the character and a pretty darn good carny and huckster, selling people on the magic of adventure. From country to country and theater to theater, nobody worked harder than him to make a buck and extend his global adventures for another day. This life of adventure on the road in wild and exotic locales was music to the ears of a young Idris who dreamed of such an expedition every single day. The two paths were about to cross and history would be made. But it started with that classified ad. As in many tales for young people, Aloha's pivotal moment occurred at the age of 16, writes Landecker. The Paris Herald contained a want ad. It read, "Brains, beauty, and breeches. World tour offer for lucky young woman. Wanted to join an expedition. Asia, Africa." Fate brought her into the environs of the equally restless Walter Wanderwell, a Polish emigre who had reinvented himself as an Anglo-explorer. Polish by birth, but definitely American by his thirst for thrills, influence, and globalism, his passion above all was world peace and the formation of a world armament police. Wanderwell had obviously been deeply shaken by World War I and wanted to make a difference. He needed a female secretary and companion to film and star in his expedition by car around the world. This expedition would be both a vehicle for his exploits and his pacifist cause. It would take a rare woman to match the grandeur of this enterprise, and Aloha was that woman. As much as this journey would require bravery and nerves of steel, it also necessitated technical improvements to the automobile. To have a car capable of around-the-world travel, some tweaks to the original, off-the-line Ford Model T design would be required. Though not in service for Aloha's historic journey, Fink Jensen and Eustace Walden break down the wild specs for an early Captain Wanderwell auto. They write, "The vehicle was bizarre, covered with autographs, advertising slogans, and a giant planet-shaped logo that read, 'Around the World with Walter Wanderwell.' The body was constructed of 22-gauge sheet metal, riveted in an aerodynamic shape, including a tapered fastback design that Wanderwell would eventually patent. There were no doors, but it had removable floorboards for easy access to both the transmission and hidden compartments, pressed steel wheels, wooden spoke tires were still the norm, and telescoping axles that allowed the car to travel on railway lines. All of it fastened to the chassis of a Model T. Now, the general makeup of the Model T wasn't the only thing undergoing big changes as the journey prepared to commence. This voyage was going to be one of spectacle, of showmanship. Much like today, the marketing and image of something is almost just as important, if not more important, than the thing itself. The whole operation hinged on raking in the cash to keep it moving, and a catchy name could help out quite a bit. Fink Jensen and Eustace Walden take us deeper into the big name change for the girl when they write, "Idris, a name she never much cared for, it was a boy's name to begin with, didn't sound exotic enough for a grand expedition, let alone public stage performances. She had promised Cap that she could dance, and since one of her favorites was her Hawaiian Aloha dance, she adopted the name. Idris became Aloha. The biographers continue, when Aloha's adventures began, there were other female explorers in the public eye, but none had the sheer scope of hands-on achievement and the downright earthiness that Aloha possessed. Amelia Earhart flew high in the sky and was supported by an advertising team and corporate funding. Aloha was a creature of the celebrated automobile, and she extrapolated wildly on the adventure it offered. It was that name and a highly unusual appearance that made Aloha instantly memorable and recognizable, and paved the way for quests of all sorts. What about her looks, though, was it that was so extraordinary? Tracy Landecker explains, Aloha was inordinately tall, making her something of an alien. She grew to be 6 feet in stature, when the median height for women at the time was 5'2". With her rare movie star visage, blonde hair, and robust stature, she had to have been a target even on a subconscious level by those around her. A veritable freak. It certainly enabled her to be the absolutely formidable presence she was in situations on the road that would have toppled most women. Let's talk about this book by examining key moments in the life of the young explorer. When we left off with her life, she was in school in Nice, France. This episode is going to be a bit of a Frankenstein's monster of purpose. On its surface, it's a simple book review of Call to Adventure, but it's also a biography of Aloha Wanderwell. At the same time, it also serves as a look at the early years of silent travel vlogging. It's got a lot going on, and we hope that it all comes together into a fun and cohesive look at the adventurer extraordinaire. To that end, this segment of the episode will be covering the in-book adventures of Aloha Wanderwell. And to keep some surprises alive and to hopefully entice you to buy the book and give it a read, we will just be discussing some of the bits of the stories that we found particularly interesting, worth sharing, or film-related. We talked earlier about the ad Aloha answered, but let's talk about Aloha's first viewing of a Captain Wanderwell picture. This first viewing came after the girl, without a penny in her pocket, snuck into a showing of Wanderwell's exploits on the big screen. Aloha would write, already flashing across the screen were the magnificences of the American National Forests. The pictures moved on to a storm on the high seas, then there was debarkation from a ship in an English port. There were high officials and cheering crowds to greet the American adventurer. This all leads to the fateful first meeting of the two. Aloha continues, faintly discernible in the dim light cast from the screen, I can make out the form of a man in a khaki outfit, whose voice, speaking broken French, came from the shadows of the stage. His story was magical to me. It was at that screening that Aloha would meet the captain for the first time. That would lead to the ad in Nice, France newspaper, which brought her on board the Wanderwell expedition officially. In 1922, with her mother's permission, the girl left school in Nice to answer that fateful ad for a secretary and on-screen personality for an around-the-world expedition. She joined the Work Around the World Educational Club, or WAWEC, created by the self-proclaimed Captain Walter Wanderwell in 1919, which served to promote the newly formed League of Nations. A lot is made of Aloha and her exploits driving around the world. Another thing to think about is the actual fact of driving itself. While the gang was trekking across India, things would get rough on the streets. When you read Aloha's account, it sounds almost Mad Max-ish in parts. I get annoyed and angry when it rains lightly or there's a dusting of snow. But the Wanderwell expedition was rolling through very car-unfriendly environments on an everyday basis. For India and the drive to Calcutta, Aloha writes, the path was of sand and rock, and then the dust surface came again, and the cars plowed through as I held grimly to the wheel. I became sure the heat would overcome me, for there seemed a torrent of fire pouring down from the sun. The aluminum of the car body grew so hot I could not touch it. The sun's rays drilled through the double canvas top of my car. The heat bored into the nape of my neck, and I felt excruciating pains shoot through my head. I was certain I was about to get sunstroke. I mean, you can almost feel the extreme heat as you read her description. It sounds incredibly harrowing for anyone, let alone a 16, 17-year-old girl. And this is still in the infancy of automobiles. They weren't the smooth-running machines of today. No air conditioning, no convenient gas stations. Long road trips were really, when you think about it, adventures in and of themselves. Now throw in exotic and unfamiliar surroundings, and you have a real recipe for danger. One of the things I enjoyed reading about, surprise, surprise, was the actual filming of their various travel exploits. While the book didn't really go super in-depth with a lot of the filming details and behind-the-scenes minutia, it was fun seeing how Captain Wanderwell would set up shots and how the two of them would commit some pretty exotic scenes to film. Just making the voyage was insane enough, but to also have the duty and responsibility to film is pretty wild, and incredibly daring. Of course, though, not every Kodak moment went off without a hitch, though. Take, for instance, when they were traveling to Calcutta, but stopped at the Ganges River in Benares. With the Wanderwell expedition still on the road to Calcutta, a stop was made along the Ganges in a village called Benares. There was a commotion that caught the attention of the caravan, causing them to stop and get that camera out and rolling. Aloha sets the scene, writing, "Cap set the camera and the soft whir of the motor was the only sound. A perfect scene for our purposes unfolded itself, for a funeral procession started down the river. The bearers of the body wore white garments and carried a long pole to which the corpse was strapped, the form swathed in white cloth. The group reached the last step. 4 men advanced into the river and slid the muslin-shrouded body into the water, the immersion lasting no longer than a minute. Our camera hummed softly as the mourners glared at us as they carried their dripping burden to a pile of unlighted wood." She would go on to describe the funeral pyre they were witnessing in pretty solid detail before explaining, "We filmed for 2 hours. The stench was frightful. When we ran out of film, I had seen enough." Now, we're going to take a moment away from adventuring for a brief nerd side tangent. I'm a huge Star Trek fan, and more specifically, Star Trek Deep Space Nine. This is a rare occasion where the worlds of Trek and silent film converge, at least sort of, so I'm going to take the chance. If you watch Deep Space Nine, you have some passing knowledge of their Danube-class shuttlecraft or runabouts being named after rivers all over the world. In the first few chapters of Aloha's book, we read about her interactions along the Ganges and China's Yangtze Kiang. I can dig that. I like to think that Aloha hit some of my other favorite runabout river inspirations at some point as well, like the Danube, the Orinoco, and the Rio Grande. Alright, so with a little Star Trek silliness behind us, let's get back to the story and, I don't know, maybe have another tangent here. Let's have a little fun with numbers as we continue on this adventure with Aloha Wanderwell. Now, the young explorer would celebrate her 18th birthday in Vladivostok, deep in Siberia. At this point, it was 24 months into the journey, and Russia was the 38th country to be driven through. And that, folks, leads us to Japan, the 39th country on the list. Now, the competition for the entertainment dollar was incredibly intense and gruesome in Japan before a royal visit got them in the zone with crowds clamoring to see their show. Through the perfect confluence of events, the Wanderwell expedition got an unexpected rub from the Crown Prince of Japan, who stopped by quickly before heading out to oversee military maneuvers. His Highness arrived, turned to them, smiled, and bowed. This was enough of an interaction for the news to spread all the way to Tokyo like wildfire. The gang was at this point royally recognized, and after that, as Aloha put it, the populace was at our command. Since this is a film podcast, let's talk about some of Aloha's cinematic experience in the city of Kyoto. Aloha writes, "Kyoto is the center of Japan's film industry, and we had the freedom of one studio for our film work. Here we met Onoe Matsunasuke, whom they described to us as the Errol Flynn of Japan. He and another actor staged a sword duel in costumes of the ancient samurai, and I saw the Japanese idea of a Western, in which no firearms were used and no hero kissed the heroine even after desperate rescue. It was not exciting." Now, this grand adventure of hers was propelled by the showing of films. These screenings and movies they produced allowed a certain financial freedom and the continuation of the saga. The cash came from ticket sales, newspaper reports, and sales of merchandise. But in Tokyo, Captain Wanderwell was unable to source that top dollar. This would prompt Aloha to trade in her leather adventure hat for her salesperson hat. Now, the young lady wasted no time in stepping up and taking over the stalled contract negotiations. Aloha soon tracked down the biggest theatrical manager in Tokyo. In her book, Aloha takes us readers through the negotiation process as she uses her media clout and status to close a huge deal. In this excerpt, it's really cool to follow her along that process. Though not written about in great deal previously, I can feel that it's pretty safe to extrapolate that this encounter, in a nutshell, is how most of the financial and contractual dealings went down. Aloha describes this interaction with the theater manager, writing, "We're here for a week," I said. "Then we sail for America. We'll spend 2 days advertising and 5 days showing the films. $1,000 American, take it or leave it." I nodded toward the window where outside the crowds were milling around my car, examining the complimentary plates of auto clubs from half the world. The sight of the crowd was convincing. "All right," the manager said. "I'll get out posters. We'll do everything for you. You sign this contract, please." The manager was wily. He knew perfectly well I was offering a real and new attraction for his theater. But the bargain was made, and certainly Tokyo made lions of us. After a solid run in the land of the rising sun, everyone involved with the Wanderwell expedition was in need of some time back in the US of A. Aloha writes, "I took down the Japanese courtesy flags from the cars the next morning, and the stars and stripes waved alone." The return to the United States would prove a little less than cinematic. What was previously looked at with wonder and novelty in the far-flung corners of the globe was far less exciting stateside. There was no ticker-tape parade welcoming them home as Aloha thought there might be. In a country with more stars than the night sky and automobiles everywhere, the Wanderwell expedition had returned, but with minimal fanfare. Things were going so poorly for Aloha that in California, she ended up being arrested and going to court over a misunderstanding over a belt of all things. This belt fiasco would result in a $200 fine, but no jail time. Still, though, it was a wake-up call for Aloha. Throughout their adventure, she was welcomed as a star, as a dignitary. Her legend often preceded her in the countries they drove through. But now, she was just a fish in a really big pond. Things wouldn't stay that way for long, though. The now 19-year-old stayed in Los Angeles to work on editing the expeditions, filmed while Cap and the Cars went to Detroit Car City for some much-needed repairs and upgrades. The next journey was to be South Africa, was going to cover Cairo, was going to cover Africa. But it wouldn't be long before the globe was back, trotting the globe and working for those sweet, sweet views. This time they were off on the road across Africa, ultimately planning on getting to South America. While in Africa, still their recently refurbished caravan started in South Africa and would head to Portuguese East Africa. This stage of the journey was beset with danger from all sides. The water, while beautiful, exotic, and cinematic, would prove to be more of a horror film. They filmed and subsequently killed a number of crocodiles in an effort to show nature's fury. Aloha would write, "Coming up toward the east bank, we saw a family of crocs lying on the beach with their jaws open. There was no movement from them, and they might have been tree logs, yet they are among the swiftest moving beasts on land or in water." The girl continues, "Now I press the automatic switch of the camera, and as it whirred, those open jaws snapped shut, the brutes whirled, each in its own length, and made for the water. Anyone within reach of those slashing tails would have been cut in two. 2 shots rang out, and both reptiles were dead. It was an exciting moment, one I shall never forget." Now, angry reptiles weren't the only murderous critters the expedition encountered. In fact, a number of folks would perish during this run. Not Wanderwell members, but people they sometimes met grisly ends. In fact, 2 guys they encountered in Africa ended up being mauled by lions not too long after. It was pretty perilous stuff as they traveled from village to village, meeting tribe after tribe. Now, Aloha finishes the book, leaving us readers wanting more, when she wrote of an exchange between her and Cap. The young adventurer writes, "What's your idea, Aloha?" Cap spoke more or less idly, so that my next words caught him off guard. "Well, why the same continent twice? If you're willing, and after our lecture tour is finished in the States, I was thinking of South America, Amazon headhunters and Inca cities. Oh, you know, all that below the equator, practically on the other side of the world." So, with the book closed on the book portion of the episode, let's look at that filmography of our favorite transcontinental driver. First, we have to remember that the films of Aloha Wanderwell and the Wanderwell expedition as a whole were living, breathing, and evolving projects. These films were constantly being re-edited, added to, and remade depending on their location. They were constantly trying to make a buck to finance the next leg of their adventure. And they weren't only financing the operation solely on movie tickets. These screenings also raised awareness of their travels in the local market they were in at any particular moment. Various affluent locals would see press about the expedition and donate money to the cause. These were travel logs, but also an early version of the infomercial. Tracy Landecker adds, "The Wanderwells were DIY. They funded every foot of their travels through Europe, Asia, Africa, and South America with shows for the general public, featuring films they had shot on the location and milieu they had encountered before. In Call to Adventure, we are treated to a vast array of colors and sounds. They managed to capture worlds of human existence never before recorded. Some of these worlds, tragically for us, no longer exist. They do exist, however, in the 1929 documentary With Car and Camera Around the World, which made them internationally acclaimed explorers." Now let's talk about those filming experiences whilst on this historic Wanderwell expedition. Join me now for a quick rewind to the portion of the expedition where they were traipsing across India. In her autobiography, Aloha didn't always go super in-depth into the ins and outs of the filming process. But as a behind-the-scenes nerd, these stories are some of the ones I wanted to read about the most. Unfortunately, Aloha's book wasn't the best at that particular aspect. But I really can't blame her. I mean, it was written in the 30s, and who would really want to hear about how a camera was positioned when you can hear about her being in the middle of a war, of natural disasters, and other dramatic events? It certainly was a book of its time, in more ways than one, as we'll learn. In order to find out more about the filming details, we turn back to Fink Jensen and Eustace Walden and their book to see how these incredible travel films were made on the fly. It really is wild to see how they were able to make these pictures. It was a tricky new thing, the making of movies, and to do it in such wildly unpredictable locales and situations is pretty heady stuff. Now, Eustace Walden and Fink Jensen write, "They returned the next morning, cameras in tow, selecting angles, planning for shadows cast by the sun, and once the camera arm was cranking, signaling to passerby that they should keep on walking and please ignore the camera." You know, that makes me think that some things really never change. The appearance of a camera, no matter where or how exotic or mundane the location, will always cause people to stop and stare, or, heaven forbid, do other weird things in an effort to get on camera. I mean, it's a tale as old as time and crosses all cultural and geographical boundaries. Cameras cause commotions, always have, and really, when you think about it, always will. Fink Jensen and Eustace Walden continue, "By the time they completed the day's filming, they were giddy with excitement. Walter, no doubt, was busy imagining what audiences back in the United States would say. Certainly there were dozens of showmen claiming to have traveled the world, but how many of them could prove it? The exposed footage would then be checked, the canisters wrapped in felt and stored in the car for development at Calcutta. And the cycle continued. Make films, sell tickets to watch and other memorabilia, and move on to the next city, country, or continent. It was a pretty genius setup that would make any entrepreneur really proud. But how did viewers of these films react to the worldwide cinematic exploits of the Wanderwell expedition? The general audiences greatly enjoyed the pictures. They saw them as an escape and a way to see the extraordinary. There was no internet, there was no National Geographic, and really no way for people to see stuff outside their local area easily. It was really an adventure each time, and to have Aloha do a presentation, that would really put things over the top with crowds. But, on the other hand, show favorite reviewer Morton Hall of the New York Times wasn't too big of a fan, so to say, of this first travelogue, 1929's with car and camera around the world, when he wrote, "The film, for the most part, is exactly what a majority of tourists would take with a motion picture camera." Now, Morton Hall has been on a magical run over the last few weeks. He has been especially positive about the last few movies we've covered, so it was only a matter of time until that positivity gave way to the always entertaining but darker side of his reviews. Now, Jessica LaPrest of the Women Film Pioneer Project website wraps up the many films and skills of the young explorer. LaPrest writes, Aloha participated in the production of 4 travelogue films while working with Walter Wanderwell, with Car and Camera Around the World 1919 to 1929, The Last of the Bororos 1930 to 1931, Flight to the Stone Age Bororos 1930 to 31, and The River of Death 1934. For these films, Aloha was sometimes actress, director, cinematographer, or editor. Indeed, rather than be limited to rigid production roles, all of the Wanderwell expedition crew served in different capacities, working together to complete and present their travelogues and lectures. To say I loved reading this book is a bit of an understatement. To read it was to feel part of the dangerous yet exciting global trek. It's an autobiography overflowing with adventure. Some of the books I read in service to this podcast are dense and not the lightest fare. You know how scholarly tomes can be. I'm not saying that's a bad thing either. As someone who often goes overboard with info being stuffed into a podcast episode, I love information and lots of it. But as a read, Call to Adventure was both easy and breezy literary experience. Aloha Wanderwell Baker's autobiography is a fantastic pick-up-and-go story, and reading the perils faced by the Wanderwell gang had me constantly on the edge of my seat. Of course, I would have loved to have seen more movie and filmmaking-related stories detailed throughout the book, but it is what it is. The vlogging stories we do get are pretty darn good, and only made me thirst for more behind-the-scenes bits. The good side of this book's easy breeziness is also its down point. Look, everything Aloha committed to paper was top-notch super best, right? As I mentioned, though, it's a bit of what's not in the book that has me wanting more. And I'm talking about more than just adding some film details. It's a breezy, surface-level read for a reason. Aloha's recounting of events and the order in which they occurred is just fine, but a little depth is never a bad thing. Though she was a tremendous explorer, Aloha specifically never really goes super beneath the surface much, if at all, throughout the book. In fact, it gets downright frustrating when she talks about some amazing, unbelievable experience she had, but never really details how it made her feel. Tracy Landecker writes, in Call to Adventure, her observations are often breathlessly descriptive, but not at all emotional. She retains a can-do attitude and candid detachment throughout that comes from life experiences beyond her years and an admiration for hard work and stick-to-itiveness. Landecker continues, Aloha is always a visitor at arm's length with everyone around her. It is this sense that she retains even to the reader, a heroine who flashes brilliantly across the mind screen, who every 30 seconds achieves some impossible act, but will never really let us close, who will never really let us in. Though some deep emotional undercurrents are absent from the story, Aloha Wanderwell Baker is telling. I cannot recommend this book enough. The pictures Aloha paints for her readers are incredibly vivid and grip the reader from the outset. No doubt these tales have been perfected over years and years of live performances and thousands of film screenings. She is showmanship personified and knows how to capture the imagination of a live audience. Call to Adventure as a piece of entertainment is proof positive of that. While her book is great, action-packed read, there are some components that have really not aged so well. I actively cringed while reading some of the passages. The book is not just a record of the events of the Wanderwell expedition, but also of many prevailing prejudices and ethnocentric views of the era. These unflattering portrayals are sometimes at the expense of those who helped the expedition the most, which was really tough to read. Some of the passages of their time in China were especially offensive at times. Now, Tracy Landecker agrees, writing, her view of other people and other cultures, though completely of her time, are not always pleasant to read. While the 1920s was an era of ideological and technological growth, American exceptionalism and racism were still the order of the day for the majority of white people. In most of her accounts, Aloha retains the haughty distance of a missionary and an imperialist. Never at any time is that wall penetrated, no matter the beauty or the courageous character of the cultures that either welcome her or look on her with perplexity and sometimes derision. It is time to find out where your favorite silent stars are laid to rest. This is the segment where we join our favorite cinematic explorers on the other side of the cemetery gates. The history, the art, and celebrity spectacle converge in Where Are They Now? Your guide to paying your respects to the travel vlog pioneers that have entertained us so much. So before we get to the later in life scandal and exploration of Aloha Wanderwell Baker, let's catch up with some of the big life changes she didn't discuss in her book. Her travels with Cap Wanderwell started innocently enough, but their relationship would turn from professional to personal over the course of their globe-trekking drives. Alan Boyd writes, "Along the way, Aloha fell in love with Captain Wanderwell, who was not yet divorced from his first wife, Nell. In fact, upon their arrival in the United States, Walter himself was brought in for questioning on charges of white slavery, which turned out to be a ploy by Nell to force a more favorable divorce settlement. In 1925, at the age of 19, Aloha married Walter Wanderwell on April 7th in Riverside, California. Later that year, Aloha gave birth to a daughter, Valerie, in December of 1925. 2 years later, she would give birth to a son, Niall, in April of 1927. Despite being parents, the whirlwind road trips would never slow down. The Wanderwells continued their travels, sailing to Cuba and South Africa. Now, regardless of those children waiting at home, Aloha's desire to travel and explore and film would not and could not subside, ever. Tracy Landecker writes, "Even in motherhood, Aloha could not summon the will to curb her wanderlust. She describes giving birth to both of her babies, honestly expresses her perplexity at motherhood, and unapologetically leaves them in the hands of caretakers to continue her adventures on the road. From the pen of a man, this would seem unfortunately customary. From a woman, it is jarring and somewhat controversial." Now, the tales and adventures of Aloha Wanderwell lasted well after the initial Wanderwell expedition, and it is safe to say that her subsequent adventures were just as wildly dangerous, yet incredibly interesting. In an essay covering the impact of Aloha Wanderwell, Alan Boyd catches us up on the first post-car and camera adventure. Boyd writes, "By 1929, when they concluded their initial trek across the globe and released their documentary with car and camera around the world, the Wanderwells had become internationally acclaimed explorers. Their initial expedition was followed by an even more extraordinary adventure deep in the Mato Grosso region of the Amazon basin, when their plane went down in the uncharted jungle and Aloha had to remain behind with an indigenous tribe while Walter slowly made his way back to civilization to secure replacement parts, a trek that took several months." Boyd continues, "The ever-resourceful Aloha charmed the natives, continued filming, and carefully documented their lives. Her film, Flight to the Stone Age Bororos, was the earliest filmed record of the Bororo tribe and stands today as an important anthropological resource within the Smithsonian Institute's Human Studies Archive. Now, the Wanderwells eventually returned to the United States, at which point they made a home in Miami in 1929. They even donated one of their Model Ts, known as Little Lizzie, to Henry Ford before a screening of the film with car and camera around the world. Unfortunately, that car met its demise in 1942 when Henry Ford decided that Little Lizzie and 50 other automobiles should be scrapped for the war effort. Things would go horribly, violently wrong just a few years later. This is where we get a little scandalous. Now, you may have thought Walter's marriage to Aloha was the height of the scandal, and you would be incorrect. This scandal involves a little murder. Walter was murdered on his and Aloha's yacht, the Karma. On the evening of December 5th, 1932, in Long Beach, California, the captain had been shot with a .38 caliber automatic. The bullet, which had entered his back, was found protruding from his chest. The revolver, however, had disappeared as completely as the man who used it. Aloha was not on the boat that fateful night. In fact, she was in Los Angeles at the time, and despite an extensive police investigation, Walter's assassin was never found, and the crime remains unsolved. Now, being the movie star celebrity adventurer she was, Aloha soon became the focal point of journalistic speculation and legal investigation. According to the Aloha Wanderwell website, we get a great breakdown of the whole incident and its aftermath, and one of the most interesting bits concerns the whereabouts of Aloha that night and her reaction to the murder. The article reads, "The mystery of Aloha Wanderwell's own whereabouts on the fateful night was partly cleared up when she was found occupying a rented room with her sister in Hollywood, where, so she said, she had gone to complete a soundtrack for one of Captain Wanderwell's films. Faced with the news of her husband's tragic death, she showed none of the signs of a widow broken with grief. "Where are my children?" she asked quickly. As a matter of fact, Valerie, age 7, and Niall, age 6, had slept right through the shooting which had caused the death of their father. On being told that her children were safe and in care of a police matron, their young mother, usually a soft, smiling, joyous creature, lapsed into that state of glittery immobility which was to earn her the name of the Rhinestone Widow. A little over a year after the murder of her husband, Walter, the now 27-year-old Aloha married Walter Baker. The two first met in Laramie, Wyoming, and the new couple would continue their travel and film exploration business. They were married on December 26, 1933. Their first professional collaboration was a pair of travelogues entitled To See the World by Car, which was released in 1937. This film served as a bit of a greatest hits package, if you will, revisiting some of the locations previously seen in earlier Wanderwell expeditions. To See the World by Car is a more stylistically polished than the earlier production of Car and Camera, though it would recycle some shots made during Aloha's earlier expedition. Now, there's a lot you could say about Aloha Wanderwell Baker, but one thing you could not say is that she is lazy. She was constantly putting in the work. She was a star and known the world over. She was a brand and had a legacy to uphold. According to the Women Film Pioneers Project website, after the production of her final films in the late 40s and into the 50s, Aloha refocused her attention to preserving and promoting her legacy. As early as 1931, Aloha and Walter Wanderwell had presented Aloha's personal story in Hollywood with the hopes that it would be picked up as a feature film. While they were ultimately unsuccessful in securing a film deal with a studio, Aloha continued to work to preserve her legacy long after Walter Wanderwell's death and her retirement from filmmaking. That WFPP website article continues, in 1982, Aloha gave her last public performance as a travel lecturer at the Natural History Museum in Los Angeles, California for family and friends. As with her earlier performances, Aloha appeared in the complete expedition costume and lectured alongside her travelogue films. Aloha died on June 3, 1996 in Newport Beach, California. Aloha's remarkable life and career endure as a complex example of the power of self-invention, marketing, and a woman who defied the limitations of her era. In a manner completely befitting her incredible life, Aloha Wanderwell Baker was cremated and her ashes scattered. While she is no longer with us, her legacy remains. On a bunch of different levels, really, when you think about it. But luckily for us, her cinematic legacy remains preserved for future generations to be inspired by. So before we sign off, let's talk a little bit about those preservation efforts. These efforts provided the proper background and context for the donation as well as prioritization for preservation efforts. Aloha's initial 1985 donation to the Academy, preserved by the Academy Film Archive in 2014, contains both edited and unedited shots primarily for with car and camera around the world, in addition to a few sequences and outtakes from other films, including The Last of the Boreros, 1931, The River of Death in 1934, and To See the World by Car in 1937. The archive recently received a large donation of the remainder of Aloha's film collection from the Niall Baker estate. Processing, evaluation, and preservation of this recent donation is currently underway, and that is great news to hear. So with this biographical car chugging back into the garage of the Golden Silent Films podcast, we want to thank you for zipping around the world with us and Aloha Wanderwell Baker. It's been so ridiculously fascinating reliving the exploits of this decorated explorer. Did you enjoy the thrills and chills of the Wanderwell expedition? What were your favorite Aloha Wanderwell stories from these adventures? Would your car survive an around-the-world drive? How many countries did you explore when you were 16 years old? Tell us your story. Let us know all that and more at the various social media spots of the Golden Silent Films podcast. And on that note, if you failed to recall, we are on Instagram and Twitter. Let us know what you think of this episode. What silent and silent-related movies, past or present, do you want us to look at next? Our world of silent movie knowledge and experience is constantly expanding, and we need your input for our future expeditions here and beyond. You can always find us at Golden Silence Cast on Instagram, and at Golden Silence 1 on Twitter, and now on YouTube. And again, if you listen to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any other podcast outlet that allows it, subscribe, rate, review. And if you're watching on YouTube, like and subscribe. It does a lot for our visibility, and we love hearing your thoughts and ideas. We really, really appreciate all of your incredible support, and seeing how much you folks out there are listening only makes us want to make bigger and better and more epic globe-trotting episodes. And also a big thank you and shout out to friend of the show, Tom Was Here. The spirit of Aloha Wanderwell Baker runs through every travel vlogger today as they record their adventures for others to live vicariously through. Do yourself a favor and head over to YouTube and search for Tom Was Here and see one of the current best to do it. It's super cool seeing the birth of this travel film genre and how it really started a whole world unto itself. So, with all that being said, thank you to all of you fine listeners for all of your fine listening. And don't forget, the silents are golden and the talkies, they're just a fad. And travel the world.